I was driving cross-country, heading west to meet some friends and relatives near the coast. Somewhere along the way, I reserved a small cabin for a one-night stop. The plan was simple: get in late, make a quick dinner, take a shower, sleep, and leave early the next morning. By the time I pulled in, I'd been driving for nearly 9 hours straight and was running on fumes. The place turned out to be way more remote than I'd pictured. That might have been partly because I arrived well past midnight and everything around me was pitch black, dense trees crowding both sides of the narrow gravel path. I think I had imagined it would be part of a group of similar cabins, like a little rental community, but it wasn't. Just one lone structure standing by itself. I parked on the loose gravel in front of the place and headed in. Right away, I noticed something odd. The front door didn't match the rest of the cabin at all. Not a big deal, but it was impossible not to notice. The whole cabin looked like it belonged in an old Western movie. Wooden walls, creaky porch, while the door was this modern heavy slab of steel gray. Weird contrast. Inside it was all one open room. A bed, a tiny kitchenette, an old sofa, and a TV, all tucked together in a tight space. The vibe was old-fashioned, almost like a set piece. I didn't waste any time. Heated up some food, ate, and got ready to crash. I was exhausted, and it didn't take long before I was out cold. But then, maybe an hour later, I woke up, not because of any noise, but because of this sudden wave of discomfort. Like something in my gut jolted me awake. I know that probably sounds strange, but I swear it wasn't a dream or a sound. It was just a feeling. I sat up in bed, trying to listen, see if I had actually heard something after all, but the cabin was completely quiet. Still unsure, I leaned toward the small window beside me. I didn't really expect to see anything, but as soon as I looked out, I caught movement between the trees. Something was out there. At first, I couldn't quite make it out, but the way the shape moved, I was pretty sure it was a person. Which didn't make sense. What could anyone possibly be doing out here at this hour? And I'm not being dramatic when I say it was total darkness outside. Thick trees, no moonlight, not even a glimmer from the stars. Just blackness. I watched them for maybe half a minute before they disappeared into the trees. I stayed at the window, hoping I was wrong, waiting to see if they came back into view, but nothing. After about 5 minutes, I stepped away. I figured I should try to sleep again. I had a full day of driving ahead. I laid back down and shut my eyes, but I couldn't drift off. I must have been lying there for close to 40 minutes, completely still, when I suddenly heard something outside. I didn't even have time to figure out what it was before I heard it, a loud knock on the front door. And the thing is, this was a single-room cabin. That door was maybe 6 feet away from me. No hallway, no second room. Nowhere to hide, no other way out. I sat straight up, heart racing. I don't think I've ever felt that level of fear before in my life. Then came the voice, from right outside the door. A man shouted, "Hey, open up." "Open the door now. I know you're in there. Open the door." His voice was forceful, angry, not just someone lost or confused. He was demanding, and I froze. I had no idea whether to answer, to stay silent, to run, but he clearly knew I was there. My car was parked right out front. It wasn't exactly subtle. I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services. It took a few seconds longer than usual. The signal was weak, and I think my phone was trying to push the call through using data. But after some delay, it finally connected. The operator picked up, and I explained everything I could. They told me an officer was already being dispatched. The man outside kept pounding on the door. I couldn't tell if he was just hitting it with his fists or actually trying to break it open. Either way, it didn't give. He never got inside. After a minute or so, I heard his footsteps move away from the porch. Then came the sound of glass shattering, sharp and unmistakable. I knew instantly it was my car. By the time the police showed up, he was already gone. From the way the gravel was disturbed and some tracks at the tree line, it looked like he'd taken off back into the woods. But it was the middle of the night, and the officers weren't about to go chasing someone blindly through dense forest. Things got stranger when they reached out to the owner of the cabin. That conversation took an unexpected turn. He admitted that someone else had gone through a similar experience, not long ago, apparently. A former guest had reported someone banging on the door in the middle of the night, yelling the same way. But they hadn't called the police. Instead, the owner said he'd shown up the next day to find the door busted open, like someone had taken a heavy tool to it, a sledgehammer or something, but instead of reporting it, he'd quietly replaced the door with a reinforced one. His reasoning, if people found out, no one would rent the place anymore. That explained the strange mismatch, the newer doors slapped onto an otherwise aged cabin. It made my skin crawl a little. I didn't know what to make of it. He'd basically chosen silence over safety. I was just relieved to leave that place behind and make it to the coast to see my friends and family. Maybe I could have followed up with more questions or pressed the police harder. But at that point, I just wanted it to be done. Still, I can't help but wonder what that man had planned, why he came to that cabin, what he was looking for. Those are questions I'll probably carry with me for the rest of my life. I worked at a small-town gas station from the middle of 2019 until sometime in early 2021. It definitely wasn't the best job I've ever had, but at the time, it did the trick. From the beginning, I kept asking my supervisor to schedule me on the overnight shifts. I figured it'd be quieter, less work, and I wouldn't have to deal with as many people. For the first year, I mostly got daytime or evening hours. But once I hit my second year there, he finally started putting me on the graveyard shift regularly. I was right about one thing. It was dead quiet most of the time, and being alone wasn't bad either, but I hadn't really thought about how painfully dull it would get. After 10 p.m., barely anyone came through. If they did, it was usually just to fill up at the pumps. No one came inside. So most nights I was just trying to stay awake and keep myself busy. I'd wipe down the counters more times than necessary, count inventory I didn't need to, and sometimes even wander around outside just to pass the time. That night seemed no different. Around midnight, I was already getting restless, so I decided to take out the trash from the bins next to the pumps. Figured it'd kill a few minutes at least. I grabbed a roll of bags and went out to start clearing them. After finishing a couple, I made my way around the back of the building to toss everything into the dumpster. As I lifted the lid and threw the bags in, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a man standing directly behind the dumpster. I hadn't seen him when I came around the corner. He was just suddenly there. "Oh, sorry, I didn't notice you," I said quickly, mostly out of reflex. At first, I was just startled, a little embarrassed, not fully realizing how odd the situation actually was. He didn't say anything back, just stood there staring at me with this completely blank expression. Not angry, not confused. Just nothing. As I turned and walked back toward the storefront, it started to hit me how strange it was. That part of the lot didn't have any lights, and there was no reason for anyone to be back there, especially at midnight, near the dumpsters, just standing there. He didn't look like someone who was unhoused or in distress, so I couldn't figure out why he'd be back there. While I finished clearing the other trash bins near the pumps, I kept glancing over my shoulder, checking if he was still around. A few minutes later, I headed back toward the dumpster, this time a little slower, more alert, but he was gone, completely. I didn't see anyone nearby. No movement, no sound. I dumped the last of the bags and went back inside. I probably should have been more concerned, but at the time I brushed it off. There were other businesses nearby. Some stayed open late, and there was a bar down the street that people walked to and from all the time. I figured he must have been cutting through the lot, maybe trying to sober up or just wandering around. Just bad timing when I happened to catch him out back. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 12:15. Leaning on the counter, I started thinking of what I could do next to pass the time, but then something caught my eye. Just a quick flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. I turned my head toward the hallway that led to the storage room. At first, I wasn't alarmed. I thought maybe I was just seeing things, the way you do when you're running on low sleep and staring into fluorescent lights for hours. Still, I figured I had nothing better to do, so I walked over to check. As I got closer, I tilted my head a bit to see around the corner. The lights in that room were off, but right as I stepped into the doorway, I saw someone. He was pressed up close to the far wall like he was trying to stay hidden, and the second I stopped moving, he stepped out from the shadow. It was the same man from behind the building, but this time his face looked different, distorted. He wasn't just blank anymore. He was smiling, but not in any normal way. It was something I still struggled to describe. A stretched, frozen grin that didn't match the look in his eyes. And it's been burned into my memory ever since. There was this wild, furious look on his face, some twisted mix of anger and complete madness. I barely registered the knife in his hand before he swung it at me. Pure instinct kicked in. I stumbled backward, smacking hard into one of the store shelves, then turned and bolted straight out the front door. I didn't stop running until I was down the block. Only then did I pull out my phone and call emergency services. I couldn't tell if he was still inside the station. The air outside was heavy with fog and visibility was awful. But of course, by the time the police showed up, he was long gone. Looking back, I can only assume he was some unhinged drifter. Maybe he looked put together, but something was clearly off. Whether he had planned to hurt someone or just snapped randomly that night, I'll never know. Either way, it shook me. I left that job not long after. I never got any follow-up and no one ever found him, not as far as I know. Life eventually returned to normal, or at least a version of it. That night, I was home alone like usual. It was one of those quiet weekends with nothing going on. I was kicked back on the couch, watching TV with a cold beer in hand, enjoying the fact that I didn't have work in the morning. By then, I'd been living solo in a standard suburban place, 3-bedroom, decent yard. I'd gone through a rough breakup a few months earlier, and in the end, I chose to stay in the house instead of selling it. But that's a whole different story. It was getting close to 11 p.m. when I heard something. It caught me off guard, not because it was loud, but because of where it came from. It sounded like knocking, but not from the front door. It came from the back, somewhere behind me. I let the TV keep playing and got up to check it out. My first thought was maybe something had fallen, or maybe an animal had bumped something outside. The sound had a light tapping quality to it, almost like fingers against glass, but that didn't make much sense. I walked down the hallway, took a quick glance into the family room, then peeked into the kitchen. Nothing. Everything was still. No open windows, no movement outside. So I went back to the couch, figuring it was nothing, probably just the house settling, or at least that's what I told myself. I've probably always been a little too relaxed when it comes to stuff like this. I didn't think twice about it. I figured whatever I'd heard was nothing. Some random noise, a breeze, maybe the house creaking. I stayed on the couch, still sipping my drink, still half watching the TV, not really giving it any thought. But then it happened again, that same soft tapping sound, this time unmistakably coming from a window. I paused for a second, listening carefully, then stood up and made another pass through the house. That's when things shifted. One of the windows in the back room was wide open, and so was the door leading down to the basement. If it had just been the window, maybe I could have explained it away, or just the door, maybe I'd think I forgot to latch it. But both, after hearing what clearly sounded like someone tapping, that was too much to ignore. I realize now how reckless it was, but in that moment, I felt like I had to check the basement. Maybe it was the beer messing with my judgment, or maybe it was pride. I've always been a bigger guy, and I didn't like the idea of someone creeping around in my house and me doing nothing about it. I stood at the top of the basement stairs for a moment, peering into the darkness. There wasn't a sound coming from down there. I took a few careful steps down the old wooden stairs, flipping the switch for the overhead light. The bulb flickered on, but it didn't help much. The basement was unfinished, barely used, and I'd hardly been down there since I moved in. I never had a reason to. Now that I was at the bottom, I could see just how dim it really was. The lighting barely reached past the steps. Shadows clung to every corner, deep and still. It hit me all at once. If someone was hiding, I'd never know until it was too late. My pulse kicked up and the buzz from the beer vanished in an instant. That's when the fear finally caught up with me. I turned right around and climbed back up. As soon as I was out, I slammed the door shut and dragged the heaviest piece of furniture nearby to block it. Then I called the police. By some strange bit of luck, a patrol car happened to be just a few streets over. The officer arrived fast, flashlight in one hand, other hand on his weapon, ready to check the basement inch by inch. It took the officer less than 10 seconds to spot someone crouched low in one of the far corners, right by the staircase. I must have been only 3 or 4 feet from him when I was down there. The man had a large kitchen knife on him too. Thankfully, he didn't resist. No yelling, no struggle. He just gave up and let himself be taken into custody. As for why he was there, still makes no sense. When they questioned him, he claimed he was just looking for shelter. But that didn't hold up. Weather that night was clear, mild, no storms or anything like that, and he wasn't living on the street either. Turned out he had a small apartment across town and worked a regular job. To this day, I don't have any explanation for what he was trying to do. All I know is I came dangerously close to something awful, and it could have happened completely out of the blue, with no warning and no motive I could understand. It made me realize how easy it is to let your guard down, especially on a night that seems calm and routine. That all happened maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. It was early spring, and the rain had been constant for days. I'd mostly been staying indoors, finishing up some reports for work. That particular night, I was at my desk in the living room, typing away on my laptop, and I was running low on energy. Even with a cup of coffee next to me, I kept finding myself leaning back in the chair, stretching, rubbing my eyes just to stay focused. It was late, and I'd been working for hours. But then, during one of those moments when I leaned back to rest my eyes, I noticed something, movement in the corner of the room. My body jolted before I even fully registered what I was seeing. Across from me, just outside the window, was a face, a person standing there, watching through the glass. And the worst part? There was no expression, just eyes, locked straight on mine. The man didn't even react when I noticed him, just stood there with his face pressed up against the glass, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. I froze, just stared back, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Before I could say anything or even move, he turned and stepped away from the window. I had no idea how to respond. I mean, this wasn't exactly a situation I'd trained for, being watched from outside my own home. I'd never seen the guy before in my life. After a few moments, I finally walked over and looked out. But he was gone. I could still see the trail he left behind, though. Muddy footprints across the yard, leading off into the woods. I backed away from the window and stood there in the middle of the room, trying to gather my thoughts. I told myself if I could just confirm he was gone, I might be able to go back to my night without spiraling into panic. So I threw on a rain jacket, switched on the porch lights, and stepped outside. The rain had eased up and the visibility wasn't bad. I walked over to the side of the house where he'd been standing. Seeing the inside of my living room from out there made my skin crawl. The lights inside were still on, and I could see everything. My desk, the chair I'd been in, the whole space clearly visible through the glass. It was unsettling to realize how exposed I'd been. The thought of someone just standing there in silence, watching me from that exact spot, it gave me a deep chill. Then I looked down at the muddy prints again, and for some reason, I started to follow them. Looking back, I realized how reckless that was. I wasn't thinking clearly, I just kept replaying what had happened and wanted some kind of closure. But yeah, not my smartest move. I kept following the muddy footprints just far enough to reach the edge of the woods, where the trees began to cluster more tightly together. That's when something hit me. The prints weren't heading away from the house, they were pointing toward it. This was where he had come from. There were no signs of him leaving. My chest tightened as the realization sank in. I turned around fast, suddenly gripped by that primal fear you don't question. You just feel. I wanted to bolt straight back to the house, but when I looked up at my window again, my heart nearly stopped. Someone was inside. They were standing right where I had been minutes earlier, staring out at me. I didn't even think. I took off down the driveway and ran straight to the nearest house, pounding on the front door until someone finally opened it. My neighbor was half asleep but let me in immediately when they saw my face. I told them what happened, and they called the police. By the time officers arrived, the intruder was already gone, but they found the back door pried open, probably forced just after I stepped outside, and that's what still shakes me the most. And if I hadn't gone out when I did, if I had stayed inside, sitting at my desk, facing the window when he came in, I don't even want to imagine what might have happened.